What's going on, everybody? It is your boy Zamboni. I am an herbalist and astrologer, and it is time to talk about the astrology of the week ahead. Thank you, as always, for being here. Thank you for sending me a tip via Venmo, Cash App, PayPal. Thank you for joining the Patreon. Thank you for rocking with me this whole time. Thank you for liking, sharing. Thank you for sending it to a friend. You know, I have trouble with these algorithms. Thank you for all this. Thank you for being a part of this community. Let's talk about the astrology of the week ahead. Before I really get started here, I just want to mention that I have a friend with me today. So, and this friend, I think, is a perfect avatar for what we're going to be talking about this week. So when I got here this week, you can see that I hang out here at this brook and whatever. But when I got here this week, then there was a friend here. Can you see the friend? There she is. And she doesn't like pay too much attention to her, but there's a deer foal here. And so I came out to my little spot and went to go like pee before I did this, and then turned around and there was a foal behind me. And and then I shut up. I made sure to be real quiet and sat down and got set up here. And then she lied down. And so now we're just gonna hang out here together. And I think that this is a really good way to think with some of the changes that we're gonna be seeing taking place this week. So we're gonna see a couple of major transitions that are gonna set us up for where we're going next. So we're not at the place where we're going next, but we are gonna move toward that. So what we're going to see this week is we're going to see a major shift from yang signs, from like upward moving, like do all the stuff, very active, like want to handle business and move around and chat a lot and be loud and all of this sort of stuff, from those yang signs, from Aries and Gemini specifically, into yin signs. So yin is going to be a little more receptive. It's going to be a little more passive. It's going to think a little more about resting. It's going to be thinking a little more about sitting or being quiet instead of being loud. It's going to think more about dark and cool rather than hot and light, this kind of thing. So the first thing that we're going to see this week is we're going to see Mercury moving from Gemini into Cancer. So Mercury is at home and comfortable in Gemini. Mercury does the Mercury things very loudly and mercurially in that space. And so we can think about Mercury as being our communicator, right? Mercury does really well with like storytelling and narrative, and wants to say the things and wants to communicate in a way that is like intelligible. Especially there's a strong desire to like say the thing that's on your mind with Mercury in Gemini especially. As Mercury moves from Gemini into Cancer, then we're going to see Mercury moving into a water sign. So Serapio says that water signs that Mercury in a water sign is mute. So this is like Mercury, who normally wants to chat, suddenly can't say things anymore. We can think about being underneath the water and the idea of trying to speak underneath the water, right? It's difficult. You can't get the words out in that sort of space. This is often classed as a debility for Mercury, because Mercury's job is to say the thing and to be understood. But what if we think differently with this? What if we think instead about how, like, if I had to think of a keyword or a key phrase for Mercury in Cancer, it would be listen to your body, right? If Cancer is the moon things and has to do with how you feel in your body, and have you been eating properly, and have you been drinking water, and have you been sleeping and resting, have you been doing drugs, have you been out exercising, like have you been out on the town, what kind of things have you been doing, and how does this make your body feel, and how does this make your mind feel, right? This is classic moon stuff with Cancer and this sort of stuff, right? So as Mercury is the communicator and Mercury is mute, well, what happens when you shut your mouth for a second? Then other things which are making sounds can then be heard. And so there's a sense of paying attention and receiving something, right? That's that yin bit. There's a sense of receiving information from Mercury, because Mercury's job is to deal with and process information, right? In Gemini, there's an outgoing nature to that. There's a sense of like, I want to talk about it. I want to tell my story. In Cancer, because it's mute, then we're going to be quiet. We're going to think instead about what is coming in, and we're going to sort of see how that relates on a body level, and see how that feels, see how it resonates. There's like a vibes component here in a way that wasn't necessarily present while Mercury was in Gemini. So there's definitely a strong listening component here, and I always encourage listening, just like as a rule, because I think that it's a thing that people should do. But as we sort of move into a more chaotic field, and a louder and a louder and a louder still social media landscape, then how important is it for you to add your hot take to the situation? What if instead we could think of a way to listen and to be with each other in a way that's a little bit less about one-upmanship, that's a little bit less about shouting each other down, but instead sort of like hearing and listening, and sometimes understanding that people who even have opposing viewpoints sometimes have a point, right? This sort of leads me into the opposing viewpoint bit, leads me to Mars and Taurus. So Mars is going to be moving from Aries into Taurus this week. Mars is comfortable in Aries. This is Mars at home, Mars doing Mars things Marsily. And same way like Mercury was doing Mercury things Mercurially in Gemini, but then moving into Cancer, it's a little bit sort of like out of place for Mercury. It's a spot where Mercury has to like think twice about how to do the Mercury stuff, right? Same situation is going to happen with Mars moving from Aries into Taurus. So as Mars moves from Aries, which is a sign that is super confident and comfortable for Mars, especially with that Jupiter there. Jupiter is going to say yes to the Mars things. Jupiter is going to confirm and affirm whatever it is that Mars wants to do, right? As Mars moves into Taurus, then a couple of things are going to happen here. One, Mars is going to lose a lot of dignity. Mars doesn't like being in Taurus very much. That's a Venus sign. It's sort of opposite to the nature of Mars. Mars wants to get up and move and shout and push on stuff and rage and aggression and action and this sort of stuff. Taurus would prefer to stay the same. Taurus would prefer to chill. There's something very sort of like sensuous or sensual that we always talk about with Taurus, and that can be like sort of sexy, especially once we get that Mars in there, because Mars will bring the heat. So, you know, if it's just Cancer and Taurus, then it could be like a cuddle puddle, you know what I mean? But if we think about adding some of that Martian heat there, then it can get sexy or something like this, right? And that's true. But there's also just a sense of like being in the sensory nature of things and feeling the sensory stuff. And then as we sort of lean into the sensory stuff and we think about Mars being there, Mars is so hot, we might think about acrid smells or something like this, right? Something that like, oh, I don't know if I actually like this that much, right? Especially once we see that square to Saturn starting to take place. Now, this square to Saturn is going to take a little time to sort of build up, and we're not going to really see the big stuff until we get into August or late July and into August and this kind of stuff. But this basic relationship of Mars and Saturn is going to change in a big way. Mars in Aries to Saturn in Aquarius, this was a sextile. This was going to be mostly supportive or cooperative. This is going to be sort of like lending some excitement and verve and Aries Aries action to Saturn's organization or management or whatever. This is like they kind of want to work together. Mars in Taurus is square to Saturn in Aquarius, and so is going to want to resist whatever Saturn is doing. It's going to be like, you know what, fuck that. I don't like what you're doing. Also, Mars in Taurus is going to get close to Uranus in Taurus as well. So as we look at whatever's been going on with Uranus and Taurus. So Uranus, this is going to be sudden and unexpected changes. This is going to be moves toward liberation. It's going to be things that disrupt the norm in whatever way that is. Mars is going to add a spark to that. And so Mars is going to want to kick off all that sort of stuff. Now, we're not going to see all this necessarily happening this week, but we can see how we are moving in that direction toward a kind of resistance. And if we think about the way this resistance might take place, because we're looking at Taurus, because we're looking at Mercury in Cancer, and Mercury in Cancer is nicely averse to Saturn in Aquarius. We like that about Cancer planets. We also like that Cancer planets are going to have an overcoming square from Jupiter in Aries. And so anytime a planet is under a square from Jupiter like that, that's super helpful. That helps to affirm or heal or improve whatever's going on there. And so if you're listening to your body, then you're maybe thinking with ways that you can improve that scenario. You're maybe thinking about ways that you can rest and relax and maybe just like be a little slower or quieter or something like this. And you know, with Jupiter in Aries, that I might think about a little bit about like policing that or guarding the rest super seriously. Like, I know that you invited me out and I want to be out there with you, but like, oh, I'm behind on my sleep. So I think I'm going to prioritize that. And I know it's very exciting out there, but this is what I'm actually going to do, right? Might see this kind of stuff going on here. This kind of listen to your body, and this sense of like, okay, having listened to my body, having engaged my senses in some kind of way. One of my teachers, Gordon White, talks about going out into like a nature kind of environment, such as I'm in right now, and sort of getting into a space of 360 or 720, however you know, surround not only sound, but senses, right? Like sitting in your senses in a space and sort of feeling the smell of it and feeling clothes on your body and a breeze on your skin and the sound of everything and the sight of everything. What kind of colors are we working? Like engaging that sensory component and then generating a sort of information from that. You can get into a sort of visionscape kind of situation and learn things this way. And because we're seeing that this Mercury is in Cancer, that we're not necessarily going to be able to, like the information that we get from this sort of thing is not necessarily going to be explicable necessarily, right? It's not going to be easy to make into words or to make intelligible. Again, whenever we see Mercury in the yin signs, then we see an emphasis on melody and song and poetry and metaphor and this kind of stuff, this kind of oblique description of whatever is going on. Mercury in Gemini is going to want to be a little more prosaic with it, and will you know, but as we get into Cancer and Taurus is a famously artistic sign, then we can definitely see these kind of moves toward an internal sense of knowing. And then returning to that Taurus bit, this internal sense of knowing, this may be like UPG, unverified personal gnosis, like the sense of just like, I know it in my body or the vibes or something like this. This then goes on to generate a feeling of like, we're not going to take this bullshit from Saturn anymore. And so there comes to be this kind of resistance, especially as we see Uranus and Taurus showing us all of the kind of like body disruption things. Are you getting enough food? Are you is the food or the fuel or whatever, is it priced within reach? You know, like these kinds of sort of basic necessities, as there generates more chaos, and there are all these like quippy hot takes about all the things, and and the body as a site of resistance, as well as the site of like difficulty, challenge. You know, there's all this stuff is happening, and there's so much body-centric stuff. Then how do we sit with that? How do we be with that? And how do we relate and resist whatever we think is not the wave? There's going to be a lot here to deal with. These are the this is where we're going, right? We're going to see this shift this week, but we're not going to see any of the major, we probably won't see any of the major stuff this week. We'll see what happens, you know, whenever there's Uranus, there's always going to be a surprise. But these are the themes that we're going to be working with. I'm already out of time. Thank you so much for being here with me. Thank you for rocking with me. I've been sort of meandering and trying to talk quietly because I like this foal over here. Thank you for rocking with me. Please, if you would, send me a Venmo, Cash App, PayPal. I super appreciate it. Join the Patreon. I'm out of time. Thank you so much. Bye.